Nathan Carter was a 17-year-old high school graduate with a calm determination that made him seem older than his years. For as long as he could remember, his life had revolved around music. Years of dedication and countless sacrifices had earned him a spot in the prestigious National Youth Music Showcase, a competition that drew the best young musicians in the country. His mother, Emily Carter, a hard-working music teacher at a small-town school, had been his unwavering pillar of support. She had scrimped and saved for months, surprising him with a business-class ticket as a reward for his accomplishments. As Nathan stepped onto the plane, his heart raced with a blend of pride and nervous anticipation. This was more than just a flight. It was the beginning of the journey he had dreamed of for years. His acceptance into the competition was proof that all his late nights practicing, all the moments he had missed out on to pursue his music, had been worth it. This was his chance to show the world and himself what he was capable of. Nathan took his seat in the business class cabin, a section he'd only ever passed by with curiosity. His outfit, a pair of neatly pressed jeans, a fitted polo shirt, and clean sneakers, reflected his personality: simple, confident, and composed. He tucked his backpack under the seat in front of him and adjusted the armrest before pulling out a folder of sheet music. With the hum of the cabin as his backdrop, he scanned the notes, mentally preparing for the competition ahead. The serene atmosphere of the business class was a stark contrast to the buzz of excitement within him. Nathan was lost in his music, his fingers tracing imaginary keys along the edge of his tray table. But his focus was abruptly interrupted as the flight attendants began their rounds. Among them was Catherine Doyle, a seasoned flight attendant with over 2 decades of experience. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her poised demeanor spoke of someone who had seen and managed it all. Catherine was known among her colleagues for her sharp instincts and unfiltered opinions, often forming judgments within seconds. As she entered the business class cabin, her professional gaze swept over the passengers, cataloging details without effort. When her eyes landed on Nathan, she paused. A teenager in business class? It was unusual, and her skepticism was instant. She pursed her lips and made her way toward him, her movements deliberate, her expression unreadable. "Excuse me, young man," Catherine said, her tone crisp and firm. "May I see your boarding pass?" Nathan glanced up, momentarily startled but composed. "Of course," he replied, his voice steady. He reached into his pocket, retrieved the ticket, and handed it over. Catherine accepted it, her fingers brushing the paper as she inspected it closely. Her brows knit slightly as she scrutinized the ticket, and she murmured almost to herself, "Business class, huh? Interesting." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he kept his calm. "Yes," he said, his voice polite but firm. "My mother bought the ticket for me. She wanted me to travel comfortably before the competition." Catherine's gaze flicked back to him, her eyes narrowing as if searching for any sign of dishonesty. What she saw was a young man who was composed and assured, not arrogant or entitled. Still, her doubt lingered. She muttered, handing the ticket back with a sharp flick of her wrist. "Thank you," she said curtly, her tone carrying a hint of dismissal. She turned away but hesitated after a few steps, her posture stiff. There was something in her expression, a flicker of doubt that wasn't aimed at the ticket, but at Nathan himself. Nathan felt the weight of her judgment, even as she moved on. His confidence wavered for a moment, replaced by an uneasy feeling that settled in his chest. He tried to shake it off, repeating his father's words in his mind. "Hold your ground, son. People will test you, but don't let them define you." He took a deep breath and returned to his sheet music, but the incident gnawed at him. Why had she singled him out? Why did her words feel more personal than procedural? As Catherine continued down the aisle, she struggled to brush off her lingering doubts. There was no rule against young passengers in business class, yet something about Nathan unsettled her. She couldn't put her finger on it, but her instinct told her there was more to the story. Nathan, on the other hand, was determined not to let her judgment shake him. He knew he deserved to be there, just as much as any other passenger. This trip was his reward for years of hard work, and he wouldn't let a single moment of doubt tarnish that. The quiet hum of the plane returned, and while the calm of the cabin resumed, Nathan's thoughts churned. His father's advice echoed louder now. Stand tall. Don't let anyone make you feel small. It was advice he'd need to hold on to, for this was only the beginning of an unexpected journey. Not just to the competition, but one that would test his resilience in ways he never anticipated. Nathan Carter was reviewing his sheet music, trying to steady his nerves, when the sharp click of heels approached from the front of the business-class cabin. Catherine Doyle had returned, her demeanor colder and more commanding than before. She strode directly to Nathan's seat, her gaze locked onto him with unsettling intensity. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket," Catherine said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the cabin. Nathan looked up, confusion spreading across his face. "An issue?" he repeated, his brow furrowing. "I don't understand. Everything should be fine." Catherine didn't elaborate. Her words were clipped, and her tone left no room for discussion. "Please follow me," she said sharply. The other passengers stirred, their eyes darting toward Nathan. Whispers flitted through the air, faint yet unmistakable. He hesitated, his heart pounding. Why was this happening? Why him? Still, he rose from his seat, lifting his guitar case with care. "Okay," he said quietly, masking his apprehension. "I'll follow." Catherine led him toward the galley, her posture rigid, her steps deliberate. Nathan noticed how her eyes never left him, her scrutiny now extending beyond the ticket. It wasn't just suspicion about his seat anymore, it felt personal. Once they reached the galley, Catherine turned to face him, folding her arms across her chest. The bustling movements of the other flight attendants continued around them, but to Nathan, the air felt unnaturally still. "Listen," Catherine began, her voice colder now, almost dismissive. "This seat doesn't seem appropriate for you. You should be in economy." Nathan's jaw tightened. The implication in her words was clear, and though he fought to keep his composure, it stung. "My ticket is valid," he said firmly. "There's no reason I should be moved." Catherine's expression hardened. "I believe there was an error when your seat was assigned," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Business class isn't where you should be. Economy will be a better fit for you." Her words hit Nathan like a slap. He took a moment to steady himself, his hands trembling slightly as he held onto the strap of his guitar case. "If there's a real issue with my ticket," he said, his voice unwavering, "I'll need proof. Otherwise, I'd like to return to my seat." But Catherine's patience had worn thin. She leaned in closer, her voice lowering into a quiet but unmistakable threat. "You'll either move willingly, or I'll have to involve security." Nathan's stomach churned, a mix of anger and humiliation bubbling within him. He met her gaze and nodded curtly. "Fine," he said, his voice quiet yet resolute. "I'll move." As he followed Catherine back through the cabin, Nathan felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The murmurs of the business-class passengers were hushed but cutting, their glances filled with curiosity and, in some cases, disapproval. His face grew warm, the heat of embarrassment creeping into his cheeks. When they reached the economy section, the contrast was stark. The luxurious comfort of business class gave way to cramped rows and narrow aisles. The seats felt smaller, the space more confined. With each step toward the back of the plane, Nathan felt more and more like he didn't belong. Not just in economy, but on the flight itself. He squeezed into a middle seat, his guitar case wedged uncomfortably between his knees. The tightness in his chest grew as he stared straight ahead, avoiding the curious eyes of his new neighbors. Catherine didn't say another word. The only sound was the faint clicking of her heels as she returned to the front of the plane. Nathan took a deep breath, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. He opened a message to his mother, typing quickly, "They moved me to economy without reason. Can you check it out?" For a moment, he stared at the screen, waiting for a response. But all he heard was the low, constant hum of the aircraft's engines. Minutes passed before his phone buzzed with a reply. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Just sit tight." His mother's words were comforting, as they always were, but they didn't erase the feeling of injustice gnawing at him. He leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on the small window beside him. Nathan couldn't shake the humiliation of being forced to leave his seat. He had worked tirelessly to earn his place on this trip. His mother's hard work and sacrifices reflected in the ticket she had bought for him. Yet here he was, crammed into economy, stripped of the sense of pride and accomplishment he had felt just an hour ago. He tried to focus on the view outside the window, but his mind was elsewhere. His father's words echoed in his head. "Hold your ground. Don't let anyone tell you where you belong." Nathan knew this was bigger than just a seat on a plane. It was about being seen, being respected. But for now, all he could do was sit and wait, the sting of Catherine's words still fresh in his mind. Back in the business class cabin, Catherine walked briskly down the aisle, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of satisfaction. She had done her job, or so she told herself. But as the whispers around her grew louder and the disapproving glances of other passengers became harder to ignore, a seed of doubt began to take root. Deep down, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation wasn't right. But she brushed it off, burying her unease beneath layers of professionalism as she continued her duties. Meanwhile, Nathan stared at his phone, rereading his mother's message. Her reassurance steadied him, but the feeling of being wronged lingered. He knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Nathan clenched his fists and inhaled deeply. He knew this wasn't just about his own discomfort. This moment, as frustrating and unjust as it felt, could be more than just a personal affront. It could become a turning point, not just for him, but for anyone who had ever been unfairly judged based on assumptions. In the business class cabin, Catherine Doyle walked briskly through the rows, her initial satisfaction at resolving the situation with Nathan already beginning to fade. She busied herself with routine tasks, but her mind kept circling back to what had just occurred. The murmurs from passengers, the sideways glances, none of it felt right. As Catherine adjusted a tray table and straightened a passenger's blanket, she felt the weight of the disapproval around her. The looks she had dismissed earlier as fleeting seemed to linger, and her confidence began to waver. Something about the way she had handled the situation nagged at her, a gnawing sense that she had made a terrible mistake. Her thoughts were interrupted when Ethan Miles, the lead flight attendant, stepped into her path. Ethan was tall, composed, and carried an air of authority that made his presence impossible to ignore. He had been observing the events from the front of the cabin, his keen eyes taking in every detail. "Catherine," Ethan said, his voice steady but probing. "I noticed you moved the young man from seat 3A. What was the issue?" Catherine hesitated, adjusting the tray in her hands, as if it could steady her nerves. "He didn't seem like he belonged there," she replied, her tone dismissive. "I mean, a teenager in business class? It didn't sit right with me." Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, his expression calm but questioning. He didn't respond immediately, instead leaning in slightly and asking, "Did you check his ticket?" Catherine froze for a moment before answering, her voice quieter now. "Yes, but it didn't feel right," she murmured, Ethan's brow furrowed. "Did you verify it in the ticketing system?" he pressed, his tone firm but measured. "We don't operate on feelings, Catherine. We follow the system, the rules." Catherine's jaw tightened as her confidence crumbled under his scrutiny. I didn't find anything wrong with it," she admitted, looking down at her tray. Ethan sighed, his voice turning more insistent. "Catherine, you can't just move passengers around because of what you think. Your job is to provide service, not pass judgment." His words landed heavily and Catherine's face flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the intercom buzzed, interrupting their conversation. "Catherine Doyle, please report to the cockpit," the captain's voice announced, firm and authoritative. Catherine straightened, her face reddening further. "I'll deal with this later," she muttered, turning to leave. Ethan didn't look convinced as he watched her walk away, his expression a mixture of disappointment and concern. When Catherine entered the cockpit, the air was heavy with tension. The captain, a man known for his stoic professionalism, handed her a phone without a word. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "This is for you," he said, his voice colder than usual. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she took the receiver. "This is Catherine," she said, her voice tight. On the other end of the line, the voice was calm but carried an unmistakable authority. "Catherine, this is corporate," the voice began. "We've received a complaint about your handling of a passenger. This behavior is unacceptable. You will provide a detailed explanation when the flight lands." Catherine's stomach churned as the weight of the words sank in. She had hoped to smooth things over, to avoid any escalation, but it was clear that the situation was far from resolved. The company was now involved, and consequences were inevitable. "I understand," Catherine replied, doing her best to maintain her composure. "I'll explain when we land." As she hung up, her hands felt cold. The captain didn't offer any reassurance, simply fixing her with a steely gaze. "Fix this," he said bluntly. Back in economy, Nathan stared out the small window, the events of the last hour playing on a loop in his mind. His phone buzzed, and he saw a new message from his mother. "I'm taking care of it. I'll call the airline once you land. This won't be ignored." Her words brought him a small measure of comfort. His mother's determination had always been a source of strength for him. But even as he tried to focus on her reassuring message, the feeling of injustice gnawed at him. Nathan wasn't just angry. He was determined. He knew this wasn't just about a seat on a plane. This was about challenging assumptions, standing up to bias, and ensuring that no one else had to go through what he had just experienced. As the plane began its descent, Nathan Carter's thoughts lingered on his father's steady, reassuring words. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Nathan knew he couldn't let this moment pass. He had earned his place on that flight through hard work and dedication, and no one had the right to make him feel otherwise. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and the plane touched down smoothly on the runway. Nathan tightened his grip on his guitar case, a renewed sense of determination settling over him. His ordeal wasn't over, not yet. This was only the beginning. As the plane rolled to a stop and passengers began gathering their belongings, Nathan felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. Glances from other passengers lingered on him, some subtle, others more obvious. He could almost hear the questions running through their minds. What had happened? Why had he been moved? Nathan stood up, his posture steady, his expression calm but resolute. As he made his way toward the exit, he passed Catherine Doyle. She attempted a strained smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for flying with us," she said, her voice tight. Nathan met her gaze, his voice calm but carrying an unyielding weight. "You'll hear from my father soon," he said, his words deliberate and measured. Catherine's face paled slightly, her professional demeanor faltering as he continued past her. Nathan stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, feeling a mix of exhaustion and resolve. He knew his experience wouldn't be ignored. His father would ensure it wasn't. Minutes after Nathan exited the plane, 2 uniformed security officers approached Catherine near the gate. Their stern expressions left no room for doubt. "Miss Doyle, we need to speak with you about your conduct during the flight," one of them said sharply. Catherine nodded stiffly, her professional mask slipping as she followed them. The gravity of the situation was beginning to settle in. Meanwhile, Nathan walked toward the baggage claim, his phone buzzing with a new message. He pulled it from his pocket and read the familiar words from his father, Robert Carter. "Don't worry, son. I'm on it. We'll make sure this never happens again. Stay strong." Nathan pocketed his phone and continued toward the exit, where he spotted his father standing by the curb. Robert was dressed in a dark suit, his commanding presence cutting through the chaos of the terminal. He ended a phone call quickly when he saw Nathan, striding over with a mix of calm authority and concern. "Are you all right, son?" Robert asked, his voice steady but laced with worry. "I'm fine, Dad," Nathan replied, though the fatigue of the ordeal was evident in his voice. "But what happened wasn't right, and you know it." Robert placed a reassuring hand on Nathan's shoulder, his grip firm. "I know," he said, his voice low and resolute, "and we're not letting this go unnoticed. I've already spoken with the airline's legal team. They'll conduct an internal investigation, and we'll hold them accountable." Nathan raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident in his expression. "Do you really think anything will change?" he asked. "People like Catherine Doyle will keep doing things like this unless someone actually holds them accountable." Robert's faint smile was filled with pride. "That's where you come in, son," he said. "This isn't just about today. It's about making sure this never happens again, to you or anyone else. This is your chance to do something bigger, to pave the way for others who don't have the voice or resources to fight back." As Robert's words sank in, Nathan felt his resolve deepen. This wasn't just about one flight, one act of prejudice. It was about changing how people saw and treated each other. The humiliation Nathan had felt earlier still lingered, but his father's confidence gave him a sense of purpose. If this experience could create change, he would make sure it did. In the days following the flight, Nathan couldn't shake the sense of injustice. He spent hours replaying the incident in his mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. It wasn't just about him, it was about something much larger. The unfair assumptions and biases that Catherine had acted on weren't unique. They were part of a broader issue that affected countless others. Determined to do something meaningful, Nathan sat down to draft a letter to the airline's customer service department. His words were thoughtful, clear, and compelling. He didn't just recount the events as they had occurred, he went deeper, highlighting the broader implications of Catherine's actions. He explained how the airline staff had failed to recognize his validity as a customer, and how Catherine's assumptions about him had been based solely on appearance. Nathan pointed out how this kind of prejudice could harm anyone, regardless of their background, and how it undermined trust in the airline's service. He urged the company to take meaningful steps to address the issue, including implementing mandatory training on unconscious bias and empathy for all employees. With his mother's help, Nathan submitted the letter to the airline's board of directors, requesting a formal meeting to discuss the matter further. At first, he didn't expect much to come of it, but to his surprise, the airline responded promptly, agreeing to meet with him. Nathan realized that his fight for justice wasn't just about setting things right for himself. It was about ensuring fairness and respect for everyone. This moment was more than a personal challenge. It was an opportunity to inspire change. The boardroom felt intimidating as Nathan entered. The walls were lined with framed accolades and corporate achievements, and the large table in the center was surrounded by executives in sharp suits. Nathan's palms were sweaty and his nerves were on edge, but he reminded himself of why he was there. As he took his seat, he noticed the attentive expressions of those around him. It was clear that his story had already made an impact. Nathan began to speak, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "I'm here today because something happened to me that shouldn't have," he started. "I was moved from business class to economy without any valid reason, simply because I didn't fit the image of who someone thinks belongs in that seat." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "This wasn't just a mistake," he continued, his tone unwavering. "It was a reflection of deeper biases that I know others have experienced too. And that's why I'm here, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt judged or out of place." The room was silent as Nathan detailed his experience. He spoke about the humiliation of being singled out and the assumptions made about him based on his appearance. But he didn't stop there. Nathan broadened the conversation to address systemic issues, explaining how prejudice and unconscious bias could undermine the integrity of the airline service and harm its reputation. "This isn't just about a seat on a plane," he concluded, his voice clear and resolute. "It's about how we treat each other. It's about recognizing the value in every person, no matter how they look or where they come from. When we choose to treat others with respect, we create a world where everyone can feel they belong." For a moment, the room remained quiet. Then, unexpectedly, the executives broke into applause. Nathan was taken aback by their response, but it gave him a profound sense of validation. For the first time since the incident, he felt like his voice had truly been heard. The airline's board didn't just agree to investigate the matter. They committed to real action. They invited Nathan to share his story at an upcoming conference on diversity and inclusion, believing that his perspective could inspire meaningful change within the company. Over the following months, the airline rolled out a comprehensive training program designed to address unconscious bias and promote empathy among its staff. Employees at every level participated, learning how to recognize and challenge their assumptions while fostering a more inclusive culture. Nathan was invited to attend several of these training sessions as a guest speaker. Standing before groups of airline employees, he shared his story, emphasizing the importance of seeing passengers as individuals rather than stereotypes. Though it wasn't easy to relive the experience, Nathan knew that his words were making an impact. The changes didn't happen overnight, but the airline's commitment to improvement was clear. They began tracking progress through employee feedback and passenger surveys, ensuring accountability and transparency. For Nathan, the journey had been transformative. What started as a painful and personal experience had grown into a movement for positive change. His father's unwavering belief in him had instilled a sense of purpose that Nathan couldn't ignore. He had proven that one voice, even a young one, could make a lasting difference. But Nathan also knew the work wasn't over. There would always be more to do, more biases to challenge, more voices to amplify. Yet for the first time, he felt truly hopeful. Looking back on the events that had unfolded, Nathan realized that his journey wasn't just about holding others accountable. It was also about holding himself to the highest standard of empathy, fairness, and respect. Through this experience, he had learned the power of his voice, not just to stand up for himself, but to bring about meaningful change for others. The fight for fairness and respect was far from over, but Nathan was ready to lead the charge. Together with his father and the airline, he was determined to help create a world where every person felt truly valued.